"Sir, this is a restricted area." The voice was young, sharp, and laced with the kind of self-assured authority that came from a freshly pressed uniform and a recent promotion. The old man did not turn. He remained still, his back to the sound, his gaze fixed upon the wall of polished black granite. Names were etched there, thousands of them. Each one a story cut short, a promise unfulfilled. The young ranger, Sergeant Cade Thorne, took another step forward, his boots crunching on the meticulously raked gravel of the Memorial Plaza. The sound was an intrusion in the hallowed silence. "Did you hear me, old-timer? You can't be here." The old man wore simple khaki trousers and a faded blue button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows in the humid Georgia air. His shoulders were stooped, his hair a wisp of white against a scalp tanned and wrinkled by a lifetime of sun. He looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered away from a tour group. He finally turned, his movements slow, deliberate, economical. His eyes were the color of a washed-out sky, pale and holding a distance that felt ancient. They settled on Sergeant Thorne without alarm, without anger, without any discernible emotion at all. "I heard you, son," he said. His voice was quiet, a low rasp, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Thorne crossed his arms, a gesture of impatient command. He was flanked by two other rangers, both younger, both mirroring his posture of casual dominance. They were lions in their prime, and this old man was a stray gazelle that had wandered into their territory. "This is the 75th Ranger Regiment's active command," Thorne stated, as if speaking to a child. "Memorial Plaza is closed to the public today for a training exercise. So unless you've got clearance, you need to leave." The old man's gaze drifted back to the wall. He pointed a trembling, arthritic finger toward a name halfway down one of the panels. "Michael Anderson. I knew his father." Thorne scoffed, a short, derisive sound. "Right. I'm sure you did. Look, I don't have time for this. My CO will have my hide if he sees a civilian wandering around here. Let's go." The old man did not move. He simply stood there, a statue of quiet defiance against the backdrop of remembered sacrifice. His stillness was unnerving. It was not the stillness of fear or confusion. It was the stillness of a mountain. Thorne's patience, a notoriously shallow reservoir, evaporated. "All right, that's it." He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I'm escorting you out." As Thorne reached for the old man's arm, the loose fabric of his shirt sleeve slid down, revealing a tattoo on his weathered forearm. It was not a modern piece of art. The lines were thick, blurred by age. The ink faded from a deep black to a hazy, bruised blue. It depicted a snarling wolf's head, but it was strange, almost primitive in its design. Entwined around the wolf's neck was a single, stark arrow, cleanly snapped in two. One of the younger rangers snickered. "Whoa, check it out, Sarge. Grandpa was in a biker gang." Thorne smirked, his eyes dripping with condescension. "What's that supposed to be?" "The angry puppies." He flicked a finger at the tattoo, a gesture of profound disrespect. "You probably 3D printed it in your garage. Let's go." The old man's pale eyes flickered for a single, infinitesimal moment. The placid surface rippled, and for a heartbeat, Thorne felt as if he were looking into the eyes of something that was not old and frail at all. Something dangerous. "Just paying my respects," the old man repeated, his voice still quiet, yet now it carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. Thorne, however, was deaf to subtlety. He saw only an obstinate old man defying his authority. "Respects can be paid from the other side of the gate," he snapped, his voice rising. "This isn't a public park. This is a place for warriors. For rangers. You have no idea what this place means." He grabbed the old man's arm, his fingers closing over the faded tattoo. The touch was a spark on dry tinder. For the old man, Silas Miller, the world dissolved. The Georgia sun vanished, replaced by the triple canopy gloom of a jungle that had no name on any official map. The smell of pine needles and cut grass was gone, overwhelmed by the scent of cloying mud, cordite, and blood. The distant hum of base traffic became the drone of a million insects, the snap of a twig, the drip of water from a broadleaf fern. He felt the weight on his back again, not the weight of years, but the weight of a brother. A boy named Henderson, barely 19, whispering apologies for being too heavy. He felt the sting of the bamboo needle. He and the other 4 survivors, huddled in a cave after 17 days behind enemy lines, marking themselves with the symbol of their silent pact. The wolf for the pack that hunted in darkness. The broken arrow for the mission they were never sent on. The mission they completed anyway. The mission that officially never happened. They were task force nomad. Ghosts. They had broken the enemy's scepter, but it had cost them everything. Their youth. Their names. Their place in the history books. All that was left was the ink in his skin and the names in his heart. He blinked. The jungle receded. He was back in the sun, a young man's hand gripping his arm with ignorant force. I said, "Let's go," Thorn growled, giving him a slight shake. Silas looked at the boy's face, at the unearned arrogance and the profound, cavernous ignorance, and he felt not anger, but a deep and abiding pity. From 100 yards away, standing in the shade of a brick barracks, Master Sergeant Reyes watched the encounter unfold. He was a man of 30 years in the service, a man who had learned to measure soldiers not by the sharpness of their creases, but by the stillness in their eyes. He had seen the old man arrive an hour ago, had watched him stand before the wall without moving, a sentinel at a forgotten post. There was something about him, a centeredness, a gravity. Now he saw Sergeant Thorn, one of his most promising but also most arrogant squad leaders, manhandling the civilian. He saw the mockery, the posturing, and it made his stomach clench. Something was deeply wrong. Thorn was a good ranger, technically proficient, physically a specimen, but he lacked the one thing that separated soldiers from warriors: wisdom. He saw a uniform, or the lack of one, and judged accordingly. Reyes knew that the most dangerous men he had ever met wore no uniform at all. He saw Thorn grab the old man's arm. He saw the flick of contempt toward the tattoo. He saw the old man's expression shift for a fraction of a second, and the hairs on his own arm stood on end. Reyes made a decision. He pulled out his phone, turning his back to the scene as if taking a personal call. He didn't call base security. That would only escalate Thorn's mistake. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he rarely used, a direct line to the aid of the one man on base who might understand. General Marcus Thorn was on base for his annual inspection. The aide, a brisk major, answered on the second ring. "Major Daniels." "Sir, this is Master Sergeant Reyes, Charlie Company. I apologize for the direct call, but we have a situation at the Memorial Plaza." "A situation?" The major's voice was already dripping with annoyance. "Can't you handle it at your level, Master Sergeant?" "Negative, sir." "I don't think so," Reyes said, his voice low and urgent. "Sergeant Cade Thorn is confronting a civilian, an elderly gentleman. Sir, I think Thorn is making a career-ending mistake." "A mistake about what?" "An old man." Reyes took a breath. This was the part that would either sound insane or change everything. "The civilian has a tattoo, sir. It's old. A wolf's head, with a broken arrow wrapped around it." Silence. Not just a pause. It was a complete and total cessation of sound, as if the world had stopped turning. Reyes could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He held the phone, waiting. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. When Major Daniels spoke again, his voice was completely different. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked urgency that was terrifying to hear. "Reyes, what is the civilian's name?" "I don't know, sir. Thorn is just calling him Grandpa." "Listen to me very carefully, Master Sergeant," the major said, his words clipped and precise. "You will go over there right now. You will stand between Sergeant Thorn and that man. You will use my authority. You will use the general's authority. You will ensure that no one lays another hand on him. Do not let that man leave the plaza. The general is coming. He is coming now." The line went dead. Reyes stared at his phone for a second, a cold dread washing over him. He had seen combat. He had been in situations where death was a certainty, but he had never heard a tone like that from a staff officer. He broke into a run. Thorn was still trying to pull Silas toward the gate. "Last chance, old man. Move, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." "That's enough, Sergeant." The voice was a crack of thunder. Reyes skidded to a halt beside them, planting himself between Thorn and Silas. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were steady. "Master Sergeant," Thorn said, bewildered. "This is a security issue. I have it under control." "No, you don't," Reyes said, his voice low and firm. He turned to Silas, his gaze respectful. "Sir, my apologies for my NCO's behavior. Would you please wait here for a moment? General Thorne would like to speak with you. Cade Thorne stared at Reyes as if he'd lost his mind. The general? What are you talking about? He's an old man who... Before he could finish the sentence, a sound cut through the air. The squeal of tires on asphalt, sharp and violent. Heads turned. A convoy of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, flags of a 4-star general mounted on their front fenders, had just screamed around the corner of the main command building. They didn't slow down. They hurtled toward the memorial, coming to a screeching, gravel-spitting halt not 20 feet away. Doors flew open before the vehicles had fully stopped. A security detail of armed men in suits poured out, forming a perimeter. The base commander, a full colonel, scrambled out of his own nearby building, his face a mask of confusion and panic. But no one was looking at him. All eyes were on the man who emerged from the rear passenger door of the lead vehicle. General Marcus Thorne. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in his classy uniform, a constellation of stars on his shoulders and a chest full of ribbons that told the story of America's wars for the last 35 years. His face, however, was not the calm, commanding visage of a 4-star general. It was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. He ignored the saluting colonel. He ignored the panicked base staff. He ignored everyone. His eyes, burning with an intensity that could melt steel, scanned the small group at the memorial wall. They found the old man, and the general began to move. He didn't walk. He strode. Each step was a hammer blow on the pavement, a drumbeat of approaching judgment. He moved with a terrifying purpose, a straight line of righteous anger aimed directly at the heart of the confrontation. Sergeant Cade Thorne felt his blood run cold. He snapped to attention, his body rigid with fear. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew, with primal certainty, that he was at the epicenter of a hurricane. The general came to a stop directly in front of Silas Miller. The fury on his face did not soften. It transformed. The rage dissolved, replaced by something far more powerful. Awe, reverence, a deep, profound, and soul-shaking respect that bordered on worship. The air crackled with a tension that was thicker than the Georgia humidity. Then, General Marcus Thorne, commander of all United States Army Special Operations Forces, a man who advised presidents and commanded legions, brought his hand up in the sharpest, most precise, most heartfelt salute of his entire decorated career. His back was ramrod straight. His gaze was locked on the old man. His voice, when he spoke, was a thunderclap that echoed across the silent plaza. It was thick with an emotion that no one present had ever heard from him before. "Mr. Miller," the general boomed. "It is an honor, sir." Sergeant Cade Thorne's jaw fell open. The sound he made was a small, pathetic squeak. His mind simply refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Silas Miller looked at the 4-star general and gave a slow, tired nod. "Marcus, you've gotten old." A small, watery smile touched the general's lips. "Not as old as you, you stubborn old goat." He held his salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He then turned, and the full force of his presence fell upon the assembled Rangers. His eyes swept over them, and the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You stand on sacred ground," the general began, his voice now low, but carrying with lethal clarity. "You think this memorial is just granite and names. You are wrong. It is a testament to men who gave everything for the soldier standing next to them." He gestured with a hand toward Silas. "You see this man?" he roared, his voice rising again. "You see a frail, old man. You see a civilian who is out of place. Your eyes are open, but you are blind." He took a step towards Sergeant Thorne, whose face had gone chalk white. "This man," the general said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout, "is a monument. He is a living, breathing piece of history that you are not worthy to stand in the shadow of." He pointed at the faded tattoo on Silas's arm. "You see a tattoo. I see the crest of Task Force Nomad. I see the ghost of the Annamite Range." A collective gasp went through the senior NCOs who had gathered, drawn by the commotion. The name was a legend, a myth, a ghost story told in hushed tones by Green Berets and Delta operators. A Black Ops unit so secret, so effective, and so completely decimated on their final mission that the United States government had burned their files and denied their existence. Task Force Nomad was sent on missions that didn't exist, to fight battles that never happened. The general continued, his voice ringing with the power of revelation. In the spring of 1968, an entire battalion of the 101st Airborne was cut off, surrounded, and facing annihilation. Command wrote them off. It was an impossible situation. No rescue was possible. He locked his eyes on Cade Thorne. But a rescue did happen. 6 men. 6 men went into a valley crawling with 5,000 enemy soldiers. They called it Mission Scepter. They went in as ghosts. For 17 days, they were the devil in the jungle. They dismantled the enemy's command structure, blew their supply lines, and created so much chaos and fear that the NVA thought they were being attacked by a phantom army. They created a corridor, an escape route. 312 American soldiers made it out of that valley because of these 6 men. 312-inch. The general's voice cracked with emotion. 5 members of Task Force Nomad died breaking the scepter. They died in anonymity, with no medals, no recognition. Their names are not on this wall. Their sacrifice is known only to God and the few men who owe them their lives. He turned back to Silas. This is the only one who came home. Silas Miller. He carried the last wounded man on his back for 2 days. He refused the Medal of Honor. He refused any rank or recognition. He asked only for one thing, that he be allowed to live in peace and that his government never speak his unit's name again. The plaza was utterly silent. The only sound was the rustle of the flag on the nearby pole. General Thorne turned his full, undivided attention back to Sergeant Cade Thorne. The cold fury had returned to his eyes, refined into a point of surgical precision. "You," he said softly. "You, with your shiny boots and your perfect haircut. You, who have never known a day of real war. You put your hands on this man." Thorne visibly trembled. He looked like he was going to be sick. "You mocked his mark. The mark of his sacred brotherhood. You mistook a Titan for a trespasser. You disgraced your uniform. You disgraced this regiment. You disgraced the very memory of the men whose names are on this wall." The general leaned in close, his voice a venomous hiss. "You are the reason we lose wars, Sergeant. Not because you are weak, but because you are arrogant. Because you are ignorant. Because you have no respect for the history that was paid for in blood so that you could have the privilege of standing here." He straightened up. "Your Ranger tab. Take it off." Thorne's hands shook as he reached up and ripped the black and gold tab from his shoulder. The sound of the Velcro tearing was like a scream in the silence. "Master Sergeant Reyes," the general commanded. "Sir." Reyes snapped to attention. "You are to design a new training block for every Ranger candidate that passes through this base. It will be a history course. It will focus on the quiet heroes, the forgotten battles, the meaning of humility. It will be called the Miller Protocol. And these 3, he gestured to Thorne and his 2 stunned squad mates, will be your first students. They will not wear their tabs again until you, and you alone, are satisfied they have learned their lesson." Just as the general finished, Silas Miller stepped forward. He placed a frail, steady hand on the general's rigid arm. "Marcus," Silas said, his voice calm and clear. "He's a young man. The young are meant to be foolish. It's how they learn." He turned his pale eyes to Cade Thorne. He saw not a disgraced soldier, but a terrified boy. "The weight of your pride is heavier than any rucksack, son," Silas said gently. "It will wear you down. Best to set it aside. This act of grace, this quiet forgiveness in the face of public humiliation, was the final, devastating blow." Cade Thorne's composure shattered completely. Tears welled in his eyes, shame and regret washing over him in a hot, sickening wave. He couldn't speak. He could only stand there, broken. The general escorted Silas to his own vehicle, treating him with the deference one would show a king. As the convoy pulled away, the plaza was left in the aftermath of the storm. Thorne and his men stood there, stripped of their pride and their rank, under the watchful, disappointed eye of Master Sergeant Reyes. Their education was about to begin. 6 months passed. The Miller Protocol became a cornerstone of Ranger training at the base. It was a brutal, humbling course, less about physical endurance and more about intellectual and emotional honesty. Master Sergeant Reyes taught it with a grim passion, using the story of that day as his opening lesson. Cade Thorne endured it. He was stripped down to his foundations and rebuilt. He cleaned latrines. He studied history. He spent hours in front of the memorial wall, reading the names, contemplating their sacrifice. He learned humility the hard way, forged in the fires of his own shame. He earned back his tab, but he was a different man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful solemnity. He was a better soldier, a better man. One Saturday, he was driving through a small town 20 miles from the base. He pulled into the parking lot of a small, greasy spoon diner for breakfast. And he saw him. Sitting in a booth by the window, alone, was Silas Miller. He was nursing a cup of coffee and staring out at the passing cars, just an old man in a quiet diner. Thorne's heart hammered in his chest. He could have just gotten back in his truck and driven away. But he didn't. He walked inside. He approached the booth, his steps hesitant. He stood there, in his civilian clothes, until the old man looked up. Those same pale, ancient eyes met his. Thorne stood at attention, a habit he couldn't break. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir, I never properly apologized. What I did, there was no excuse. I was arrogant. I was disrespectful. I am sorry, truly sorry." Silas looked at him for a long moment. He studied the young man's face, seeing the change there, the hard-won humility etched into his features. A small, gentle smile touched Silas's lips. He gestured with his chin to the empty seat across from him. "Apology accepted, Cade," he said softly. "Now sit down, son. Tell me what you've learned."